Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmer, and I'm the director of the Statewide Training Initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're excited to have you join us here today for Let the Sunshine In, bringing the hidden foster care system into the light. Before we start the webinar, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded, so if you register, you're going to receive a copy of this recording in an email from Zoom within 24 hours. That email will include the recording, a link to the materials, and it will also include the CLE information as well. If for whatever reason you didn't register, we're gonna post it on YouTube as well shortly, probably this afternoon. And so you can share with other folks. In the YouTube description, I will always be adding that CLE code, the materials as well, in case you need them. So speaking of CLE, the training was approved by the Florida Bar for one General CLE credit and one Juvenile Law Certification credit. So I'll announce the CLE code towards the end of the presentation. I'll drop it into the chat. It will also go out via email, and it will also be included in the YouTube description. Now, if you need a certificate of attendance and completion, feel free to email me after the webinar. I will include all these instructions in the chat. I will also make sure to include the instructions in the email from Zoom and on the YouTube description. So once you send me all those email requests, I'll start get to work on those certifications. Closed captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. So if you're having any issues with accessibility or captions, feel free to reach out to me. As far as questions go, you have multiple options. You can use the chat, or you can also use the Q&A feature to post questions, and we'll do our best to address them as they go. I know Robin is great at answering these questions. And before I pass it on to Robin, I just want to remind people that this training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law Section, or PILS, of the Florida Bar. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Robin Rosenberg with Florida's Children's First before we pass it on to our speaker, Janine. Robin, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Great to see your names, at least in the participant list. We are very excited to continue our training series. It's the third Wednesday of every month at noon, and a training is on topics of interest to attorneys and other folks who work in the child welfare system. I am turning this over to my colleague, Janine.Rice, who's going to address the really important topic of hidden foster care. I will be here and moderating the chat and questions, but I'm turning my camera off, and Janine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Robin, and thank you, Jorge. I'd like to thank the Public Interest Law Section for co-sponsoring this, of which I am the chair, and we'll chat about later. And also Florida Legal Services for always providing this fantastic logistical support. So this is a 1-hour CLE presentation. It's certified for both General and Florida CLE. And right off the spot, I want to tell you it's a little bit interactive, not overwhelmingly so, I hope. But there's going to be a QR code on the next slide in the lower, I'm giving you advance warning, in the lower left-hand corner. And then also, as you'll see at the top of the screen, or hopefully you see it, it says join at menti.com, use code 84190449. And this is just so that we can engage with you, because I miss face-to-face. So let's start off. The first thing I would like to know, and to kick, whoops, hold on, and just like that. Here we are. I would like to know, what is your role? How do you identify? In terms of the foster care system, if you're involved in the foster care system, and if you're not, what is your general role? Are you a social worker? Are you an attorney? Be as specific or as general as you would like. And that just gives us all an idea. Maybe, maybe not. So when you open this up in the app, you should have the ability to type it in.
Yeah, Janine, it is not
Yes.
working. Menti is not That's why everybody is putting it in there in the
Oh,
chat right now.
okay.
So I'm not sure why.
Okay. Not even typing in the code number?
No,
All right.
I'll work on it on offline. Why don't you
Okay.
go forward and let me see if I can do anything about that.
Thank you so much. So this is just a little bit about me. If you don't know me already, things that are relevant to what we're doing here today is that I provide direct representation and brief advice to young people who are or have been involved in the child welfare system, including young adults, who wouldn't otherwise be served by existing models. I serve as the chair of the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar, and I also chair the Delinquency Subcommittee of the Florida Rules of Juvenile Procedure. And what I think is really interesting about the position I presently hold is that it's like a full circle moment. When I started out in law school, in my final year, I was in a clinic that was for people with disabilities. They called it the Homeless Disability Clinic. And I was representing as a apprentice lawyer, if you will, clinic attorney, as a student lawyer. And here I am, some 30 whatever years later, in a very similar role, but with a lot of experience and perspective that informs my representation. So I would like to give a land acknowledgement. I've represented Indigenous people in my private practice, and I feel that it's important that we acknowledge that we're standing on their land. So my home is located in Broward County, and this presentation, well, it had a technical difficulty, but it was intended to be presented from land which is the ancestral and traditional homelands of Indigenous peoples of what is now known as Broward County, including the Tequesta, the Seminole, and the Miccosukee nations. I'm a visitor, and I hope to become a proper guest. It's a work in progress. We honor their enduring sovereignty and wisdom, and we hope this acknowledgement deepens our awareness, our humility, and our pursuit of justice. So here's what I would like for you to think about as objectives or key takeaways. What is hidden foster care? What in the world is she talking about? Well, broadly speaking, it's an informal temporary custody or DCF safety plan arrangement. That's like, if you want to put a concept out front that you can wrap your mind around quickly, that would be it. We're going to talk about the benefits and the consequences of using an unmonitored, unregulated procedural device outside the formal system, the need for data-informed, objective client counseling, which builds trust and supports client choice. And what I would like to see, and I hope you all do too, is increased engagement in pro bono initiatives, creative solutions, and other ways that we can provide and expand high quality early representation, what some people call pre-petition representation, for everyone involved, the parents, the children, and the caregivers, because this system affects all three of those types of clients in this informal system. So what is hidden foster care? I'm not going to read you the slides, but they're there for anybody who wants to have something in writing, and also to reference back to later on. But hidden foster care is one of the least understood systems operating in American child welfare. And folks started studying it and looking at it starting in about 2019. So let's call it 6 years ago. Beneath the formal network of foster placements, case plans, and court hearings, there exists a vast shadow system where children are removed from their homes through informal arrangements. So without a judge's order or without any public record. And that goes to what we're going to talk about later about data and transparency. So Columbia Law School professor Josh Gupta Kagan, who used to represent parents in DC, wrote a Stanford Law Review article, which is going to be in the materials provided to you afterwards. And he published it in 2020 in Stanford Law Review. And He described it as a practice that moves thousands of children into, if not hundreds of thousands, come to find out, into kinship placements each year, frequently under the guidance or pressure of state agencies, but without the procedural protections afforded in the formal foster care process. So the purpose of this CLE today is to bring the hidden system into the light to help attorneys, advocates without a bar license, and child welfare professionals understand what it is, and families even, because they'll be able to see this on the YouTube. And child welfare understand how it operates, how we can work to ensure families receive the protections and the supports that they deserve. So some examples of hidden foster care are, let's think about it, powers of attorney, temporary, these are Florida instruments, powers of attorney, temporary or concurrent custody orders, or DCF safety plans. And the challenge with these is that they don't always come with an expiration date. They don't have necessarily easy ways to have them reviewed. Now, powers of attorney, it's easy. If a parent changes their mind, if they have a written power of attorney, they should have a written revocation when they change their mind. But with the temporary concurrent custody orders, you have to learn how to navigate the court process, use the self-represented forms, figure out how to do all of that correctly. And not every jurisdiction or venue or courthouse in Florida has a fully staffed pro se litigation project. So that can be challenging for whether it's the caregivers or the parents. And what's great about these arrangements is that they can stabilize a crisis, but because there isn't always a set date, they risk prolonged separations. There's not necessarily legal safeguards. You're not entitled to a court-appointed attorney. And it may become incredibly burdensome, if not impossible, to access financial support. So the term hidden foster care has gained traction. There was a study in 2019, and then there was the law review article in 2020 that I already talked about. So there are moves afoot across different states, none of which is Florida at this time. Oops, sorry about that. And each state has different experiences, different advocates, and so their reform legislation looks different for them.
Janine, I think I know what the Menti problem is. If you stop sharing for a second and then
Yes.
make sure you've got it in presenter mode, that you clicked the present.
Oh,
I think we're just looking at the slides, not in presenter mode. But I would
okay.
stop share to fix that.
Okay.
Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we think it's important to try to include everybody if we can. A little bit easier to collect up answers than reading them from chat. But give it just a second, please.
My forte, I apologize. And I'm using two screens. There we go.
Okay, I think hopefully we're in, and when you get to the next Menti, we can all do it.
Okay. Yeah, I can.
Janine, you have a question about what does voluntary foster care mean?
So in New York, let's see.
Well, I think
I think it meant involuntary foster care.
well, there are voluntary placement agreements, and we don't see them very much in Florida, but
Yeah.
parents could come in and ask to place their children in foster care voluntarily. I think they're called VPAs. They used to be more prevalent. So they're technically available in Florida. I don't think they're used very often, though.
And I will tell you that anytime you see a source cited there, you're going to have a PDF of that source in the materials that are going to be provided to you by Jorge. Okay, so the problem, so there's definitely a voluntariness issue with these arrangements. To an outsider and even to an insider, I mean, until I did the research and really did a very deep dive over the last couple of months with this project, I always thought these were the greatest thing from a parent's rights, a parent's attorney perspective, a former parent's attorney's perspective. So to an outsider or even somebody who doesn't have a full understanding or a full experience, these actions may appear voluntary, but for many of the families, they occur under the implicit threat, sometimes express, but definitely implicit, that if you don't agree, we'll go to court and remove your child formally. What some people refer to as we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And so that does tend to impact and add a level of coercion or definitely take away a level of voluntariness when you don't have complete and total freedom in choosing the path. You have to weigh the benefits, I call it a cost-benefit analysis, but basically it's the benefits and the challenges and which one is right for you. As a result, this is a parallel, if you will, child welfare pathway that operates outside of judicial oversight. It can leave families without counsel, children without guarantees of safety or stability or services, and caregivers without access to financial and supportive benefits that would have been provided to them in licensed foster care. So they could become a level 1 foster caregiver in Florida, and their financial outlook looks very different, and the placement is less likely to break down for financial reasons. Practitioners, so in other words, the people who are in states where they're aware, they're reporting, and the information is available, or there's just been studies done, or journalists have gotten involved and conducted those types of investigations. But the reporting is that the use of informal custody transfers take the form of notarized powers of attorney, temporary custody agreements, or voluntary custody agreements, similar to what you would see in a family law practice between 2 parents, but instead involving a third party and initiated by some sort of governmental intrusion into the family. And then you have temporary custody orders, which gets a judge involved, but there's no case management, there's no supervision, there's no services. In Florida, the court can impose certain things that the parent, hoops, barriers, whatever you want to call them, that the parent has to successfully work through, and in order to resolve the reason why the case came before the judge from the caregiver's perspective. But the parent in a temporary case has to affirmatively file. There has to be a hearing. They have to demonstrate to the court why their child should be returned to their care. The concurrent ones, I think, are not as burdensome as that. And then you have these safety plans, which I'll just give you one little, I try not to give too many war stories, but one little war story I can tell you is that already in the last, probably in May or June, I was working with a family that had 3 different court orders. Well, they thought was an order. They had a safety plan from Florida. There had been a criminal no contact order that was dropped when the criminal charges were dropped. There was a temporary, but no longer in effect, order out of Georgia where the child was residing for a period of time, but not up to 6 months, and the child was not presently in Georgia. And then there was orders out of New York. So it took a lot of gathering of documents and reviewing of them and understanding how the UCCJEA applies for the father to understand that he needed to hire an attorney in New York. So these informal arrangements can be quite complicated and quite sticky when there's more than one floating around. And that's just an experience that I came across. So who's done the research that I talked about earlier? Well, people like the Annie E. Casey Foundation, an organization called grandfamilies.org. I mean, that's the website, but I think that's also the name that they go by, and the ABA Center on Children and the Law, which, by the way, if you're ever looking for a good starting point on any deep dive, you may find a lot of resources in any one of those 3 organizations. But this research deepened our understanding of how hidden foster care functions in practice. In states as varied as New York, Texas, Alabama, and California, informal kinship placements outnumber the formal foster placements, according to this data, several times over. Yet, despite their scale, they're largely invisible in official data systems because, but for a few states, there's no mandatory reporting. And what you don't see, you don't know. Sorry, I'm having another technical difficulty, so bear with me. Okay. So what is your exposure to hidden foster care? Here's an opportunity to use the mentee. Have you ever drafted or revoked powers of attorney on behalf of a parent? Have you represented parents, children, or caregivers in establishing, defending, or dissolving petitions for temporary or concurrent custody? Have you represented parents, children, or caregivers in the context of a DCF safety plan in that pre-petition early representation phase? And have you dealt with hidden foster care documents originating from another state, which is that example that I gave?
I'm not sure that it's,
Still? No?
yeah. You're in,
Okay.
you're in presenter, you've clicked on
I
it.
didn't switch out of it, but I needed to go back to be able to move the slides, so maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, I don't think you're in present mode. And that's what we need to
Okay.
be able to do.
Maybe I have to go in and out of it.
Or I can try showing the slides and then you can just tell me when to click on.
I would, can you do that, please? Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think I can do that. Give me one
Okay.
second. And I will see if I can do that. Hang on. Oops. Okay.
I figured out where the arrows are, sorry.
So actually, a quick comment here. I did refresh my Menti right now. Something must have happened because now I do have the ability to answer it.
Okay.
Thank you for your participation, by the way, and for putting up with.
Okay. Can you all see can you see the screen? And some people are starting to answer. Yeah.
I've lost the green box, so I don't know if that's.
I'm sharing.
Oh, you're doing it. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So we have
Okay.
5 of
So and I think you're more likely going to come across these opportunities if you're in private practice or in a legal representation organization that's funding isn't limited to the petition being filing. So these are creative solutions that or opportunities or what have you. So for example, in RC4, in the Office of Regional Counsel, we may have seen these as existing before the case was filed, but we didn't necessarily engage in the actual front end advice and counsel or drafting or any of that. Okay.
We still have some coming in. We have if you tried before, it'd be great if you could try again, because I see a lot of y'all are putting your answers in the chat, which is nice to see, but if we want to collect up the data, it would be more useful in the to put it into Menti.
So while y'all are doing that, I'm going to keep speaking a little bit. Advocates sometimes emphasize that, and I think I've expressed this as well today, that the intentions behind hidden foster care are not necessarily malicious. Many people, including myself, have seen kinship diversion as an alternative to formal removal. So if you're a lawyer who's represented parents and you've seen, you know, some of the adverse consequences that can occur, both the trauma to the children from the removal as well as the challenges that the parents face with economic instability when that happens. people think, oh, well, I'm going to choose who's going to care for my children, and I'm going to choose the manner in which this takes place. But those are the aspirational goals at the front end. And what we're seeing is that in reality, what is aspired to is not actually what happens on the ground. But it is a way to keep children within their extended families and to avoid the trauma of removal, foster care placement. The challenge is that when the state facilitates these arrangements without meaningful consent or legal protections, the result isn't necessarily family preservation, which is the goal, but family displacement. In other words, this family is not maintaining unity, but is being displaced into at least two different, if not more, but without due process. So no guarantee to the right to counsel, no guarantee to notice and an opportunity to be heard by a judicial officer. And what happens is that accountability gets blurred and responsibility can get erased. And you end up with an illusion instead of the intended goal. So, and relatives in these situations, whether they're genetic relatives or family-like relatives. I don't know if any of you had, growing up, I had an Uncle Jim who was not my biological uncle. And a lot of people have aunties and the like. So they're not necessarily relatives, but they can be closer to the parent in terms of the trust and the relationship than some family members. That what happens though is these relatives, other than with a some sort of formal document, such as a properly drafted power of attorney or a properly drafted custody agreement, the caregiver doesn't have the right type of medical or educational decision-making authority. And we don't always know when they're going to terminate or how they're going to terminate. And we don't have counsel, as I said before. So in the absence of clear policy guidance, you can have inequities and you have families which are navigating complex systems alone and by themselves. All right. Next slide. So for those of you who responded in the affirmative, how did your clients feel about these procedural devices? So I'm talking about the instruments, whether it's a power of attorney and they didn't use the right means to revoke it. They thought an oral revocation would work, but then there's no evidence to show law enforcement, or law enforcement doesn't recognize or understand how a power of attorney works when it's revoked. And not that I don't want to be a negative Nancy the whole time. I can give you two ends of the spectrum. When I had my private practice, a CPI reached out to me with asking me to represent a parent because everybody was in agreement as to how this relationship was going to work. It was already kind of de facto that the caregiver was picking up and dropping off from daycare, but the mom was going to go into an inpatient treatment center. And so the CPI and the mom and the caregiver wanted to make sure all the ducks were in a row. So that was the first time I used that power of attorney document instead of using a temp custody order, because I knew it would be easier for my client, the parent, to undo it when she was ready, willing and able. Okay, so a lot of confused, a lot of frustrated, not knowledgeable, pressure forced. And the willing and the relieved. So see, we have a spectrum, because what I want to point out here and what I'm going to express in more detail is that you can't have a blanket approach, right? Human beings are, and not to use the expression snowflakes, but let's say fingerprints. Each one is different, unique, and individual. And what works for one family is not going to work for the next family. And so you have to individually engage with the family to figure out, making sure that you're abiding by all of your ethical responsibilities to your client. But when you're counseling, you have to find out what the goals are and listen to what people are telling you. Can we move on to the next slide? So if you were the person, so you're the attorney and you engaged with these documents, how did you feel? Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Okay. So understanding the difference between informal and formal foster care is critical for attorneys and for families alike. Informal foster care, and this is, I'm just breaking it down for everybody, so I don't mean to insult those of you who have a great deal of expertise. In formal foster care, the government must initiate a judicial proceeding, provide notice, appoint counsel for the parents, and meet the constitutional threshold of demonstrating abuse or neglect before removing a child. I don't use abandonment here because if you had a parent who abandoned, they're certainly not going to be, they're not going to be in a position, if they truly abandoned, to use these devices. So, but you can see how someone might think a parent abandoned a child, but is just, I don't want to say in the shadows because that's a negative impact, but basically stage left or stage right, like in the wings. So what does hidden foster care do? It circumvents these safeguards. So when a parent is persuaded to voluntarily place a child with a relative to avoid formal removal, which we think of as a good, right? For the most part, no court ever reviews that decision unless it's in family court, and no judge verifies that the agreement is truly voluntary. Think of that colloquy if you've ever stepped foot in, and I think we even do the colloquies in, of course we do, in the dependency courtroom about the voluntariness of your consent, right? So, and there's a whole colloquy. None of that happens. None of that happens. No one's asking before you sign the dotted line, did you read every word? Did you understand every word? Are the words written in a way in which you, based on your processing speed and abilities, can understand them? Slide, please. So effective client empowerment means recognizing cultural and relationship contexts. So in many communities, kinship care has long been a tradition that's grounded in collective responsibility. Think of the neighborhood, however you want to describe it. But a collective responsibility. It could be within the family, it could be within your house of worship, it could be within a team sports type of situation that is like a family. But there's long been a tradition grounded in collective responsibility, especially so in families and communities of color and indigenous families. So when the state takes on these traditions, right, by using the voluntary placement, it undermines that autonomy of the community. And there is a former parents' rights attorney who's now a professor at the University of Baltimore, Aubrey Edwards-Luce, and she has observed, based on her own experience as a godmother caregiver, that these practices, and also her own professional experience, that these practices perpetuate patterns of surveillance and control, but they're being branded as family support. And you'll see a lot now in the law schools. Certainly this did not exist when I was in law school, but there are classes and clinics focused on family policing. And the young people who are interested in social justice are lining up, and they're creating student-led public interest project or pro bono projects. So this is all very heartening to see. The disparities, both racial and socioeconomic, which we know exist in the foster care, formal foster care system, also exist and intensify these harms in the hidden foster care system. It disproportionately affects families of color and low-income families, and it echoes the broader inequities in the child welfare system. Families of color are more likely to be targeted for diversion placements, and their children are less likely to receive the resources or legal protections that are afforded to others. So trust requires cultural humility and community partnership, but hidden foster care thrives when systems do not trust families and when families do not trust systems. So rebuilding that trust occurs by recognizing the strength of kin networks, listening to families' voices, and respecting their autonomy. Next slide, please. So the impacts of hidden foster care reach beyond legal technicalities and affect each one of the participants in the family in different ways. For example, when children are placed with relatives outside of court oversight, they experience separation, loss, and uncertainty, but without the therapeutic or reunification supports available to children in formal foster care. Casey Family Programs published a report in 2023 that found that many children in diversion arrangements receive no case management, no mental health referrals, have no educational advocacy, even when the circumstances of removal mirror those that would have triggered formal intervention. And these children often occupy with an ambiguous emotional space. So they live with grandparents, aunts, family, friends, but they don't necessarily understand why they are there or when they will return home. Think about the anxiety that that must create for them. Children who perceive their placement as indefinite report higher levels of anxiety and identity confusion. They spend years in legal limbo and they're unsure whether they're guests, wards, or permanent members of a new household. For parents, there's also harm. An agency persuades a parent to relinquish custody voluntarily. That parent loses day-to-day contact. What if in those agreements, there's nothing set up that talks about when and how I can see my child? And what if it doesn't talk about, or I don't understand when or how I can regain custody of my child?
Hi, Janine. I'm just going to give you a 15-minute warning.
Okay, thanks. For caregivers, they bear heavy burdens. They assume caregiving responsibilities. They face poverty, housing instability, and burnout. But because they're not licensed foster parents, they lack access to subsidies or respite care. Some have to quit their jobs or delay retirement. And in Kentucky, there was a study done that showed that after budget cuts eliminated financial assistance for informal kin, hundreds of grandparents were facing eviction or debt. And so the absence of court oversight means no one is tracking the child's well-being. One caregiver has described it as being out of sight, out of mind until something goes wrong. And then there's also, just as in formal foster care, there have been tragedies. And that's when these informal relationships make the headlines. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry. So over the past 5 years, states have begun to confront these realities through legislation, litigation, and administrative reform. Next slide. Next slide. I think these things are out of order. Darn it. So, can you go forward? Oh,
Tell me
yeah,
where you want me to be.
Pardon me?
I said, tell me where you want me to be.
You're fine where you are. So let me briefly tell you that there's, I think it's 5 states: Nevada, New Mexico, New York, Texas, and Washington. And those 5 states have passed legislation between 2021 and as recently in New York, they passed the legislation, but I don't think it's enacted yet, this summer, August. So there is a move afoot, and Texas enacted a law in 2023, and then the folks in Texas went to their federal representatives, Senator Cornyn and Representative Moran, and introduced for the 3rd time this year, last month, but it's the 3rd time that this bill's been introduced, and it doesn't get out of committee. And it's simply a reporting requirement, and it's based on the fact that what they did in Texas was working. So this bill, as well as the Texas bill, are in the materials, and I urge you to review them. And then after you've done so and you feel, confident, feel free to contact your representatives and your senators if you wish to advocate for their support. Next slide. So how can lawyers help? Well, we've talked about this. Most of it is, I shouldn't say most of it, but it's equal education and information. And then the other side is what we think of as the real lawyering, where the rubber meets the road with the negotiating and the drafting. But really, what's super important about this hidden foster care system is making sure that your client, in whatever role they're serving as, that they understand the rights and their obligations, what they're giving up in exchange for what they're getting, and you document the fact that it's voluntary. How do we know it's voluntary? What did you do? And how they get out of it. And then you can negotiate. This is when you're going to, just like if you think of a family law agreement, this is when you're going to visit. These are the services, and these are the timelines. The thing is, with these states who connect services to these hidden, and I really want you to, there is a slide in here for this. They're linking the funding to making sure that the parent or the caregiver understands. So it's just very important that you don't just create this relationship or this arrangement and you don't provide resources. Next slide. So how do you feel about these policy options? Here's an opportunity to jump in and let us know whether you think we should have increased transparency in our reporting of these outside the courtroom relationships, whether caregivers should receive financial support in these informal relationships. Yeah, okay, so that's good. That's what I thought. And one thing we haven't talked about is a written advice of rights. There's a podcast. If we have a moment at the very end, I'll look at my phone and give you the episode. There's a particular episode that I found in preparing for this presentation. And they talk about family Miranda and the fact that in Philadelphia, they don't have family Miranda, but they think it would make a huge difference. Okay, in the interest of time, can we move on to the next slide? And I must have with my finger, when you use the touch screen, I think I move things out of order. These are the legislation I was telling you about. Now, New York actually sued because there were these host homes that were authorized outside of a normal process where people could engage in rulemaking or what have you. And I did want to point out that New York has this legislation that was passed through the legislature but hadn't been approved by the governor yet as of August, which requires that any informal placement involving agency participation triggers notification to a court within 7 days, guarantees kin caregivers eligibility for foster care stipends once the placement extends beyond 30 days. And the legal aid providers in New York referred to these, the hidden foster care solution as a shadow docket. And they'd said that it had been around for decades. Next slide, please. All right, and this we went over already. So, practice tips. Due process, it's in all caps because if it's not meaningful, what's the point, right? So legal representation leads to a meaningful opportunity to be heard and to improved outcomes. And if anybody's ever experienced the grief of the loss of a loved one, you know that your decision-making ability becomes somewhat limited, like your cognitive abilities, just because of the grief or the trauma, can get in the way. So let's say, give you an example from the caregiver perspective, your son has a child and your son dies from an overdose. So now you're left with the mom, but the mom is a candidate for either formal foster care or hidden foster care. You're the caregiver and you have to make decisions about what's best for you so that you can continue to care for your grandchild for as long as possible without facing eviction, bankruptcy, having the power turned off. And then the other thing is the easy way or the hard way is not voluntary, and the courts will back you up on that. So this is best practices. Be aware of implicit biases. Use the family values that they have articulated to you or that you can determine from what they're telling you. So maybe they don't use particular words, but when they're describing a situation, you understand what that value is, but that you don't inject your own values into the decision-making process. It's their decision. You're there to provide them with information, which could include, hey man, if you don't do this and you go, there is enough evidence for the child to be sheltered, this is what's going to happen. Or based on my experience, they don't have enough to shelter you. And what Josh Gupta Kagan was seeing in his practice was that they were using these processes when they didn't have enough evidence to shelter. Plain language decision aids, graphics, whatever you think you can use in your practice that will help clients who have cognitive challenges, whether it's from trauma or other reasons. Something that they can take away with them and that they can look at and reflect back on when maybe it's not so chaotic in their mind or in their environment. Next slide, please. So 3 things: listen, be kind, and use neutral language. In other words, try to use language. Think about the language you're using. Is it judgment loaded or not? And it really requires you to be mindful when you do this. Next slide, please. So what can you do? You can volunteer for pro bono pre-petition representation. You can join the Florida Dependency Law Center if you're not already a member. The public interest law section has 2 work groups. One's for children's rights, and the other one is for parent representation. And there's a lot of good collaboration that goes on in those work groups. Parents was a little dormant, but it's back up and running now. So if you know of any listservs, any work groups, any other mutual aid for us attorneys who can suffer serious burnout, to sustain us, go ahead and drop that in the chat. We're going to save that. Hopefully we'll be able to save all the chat information and provide it back to you. Next slide. Sunshine is the best disinfectant and the first step towards justice. I thought that would be a lovely way to end this presentation. And if you want to drop in here, we can little word bubble, your last word bubble opportunity. What will you take away today? Or if you've had time to think about it, what is it that you think you'll do going forward?
Thank you, Janine. You did great. Sorry about all the technical difficulties and slides getting out of order. So folks, you will, when you get the information from Jorge, it will have all of the slides, presumably in the correct order. Lots of information about what other states are doing. And there are some reporters in Florida that are looking at hidden foster care. If you have information or stories that you would like to share, let us know and we can connect you with people that are looking at what is actually happening for families in Florida. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
I dropped the CLE code in the chat. I'm gonna read it out loud just in case. It's 2513543N. We set up a Dropbox folder. Janine has the slides in there. Janine, just let me know if you want to double check that they're in the right order. But
No,
the
those ones
files.
are.
Okay,
Those
so
ones
those
are.
can, yeah. Okay, so those are good to go then. There's a lot of content in that folder that Janine put together. So as I said earlier, you're going to get an email with the link to the recording within 24 hours or so. It will also include the CLE code. We'll post it on YouTube as well. So start sending out those emails if you need a certificate of attendance, because I'll start putting those together probably within the next 24 hours and sending those out. So thank you all for joining us. In the email, I will also include some information about Florida's Children First. Make sure to bookmark their website, follow them on social media. I will also include information for the next webinar of this series. So we still have a few more webinars to go. So as always, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Janine and Robin, for leading another
Thank you,
great webinar.
Jorge.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. See you at the next one. Bye.